back here in your lovely space, the Theosophical Society in Maryland. I am grateful and humbled once again to be invited to share what it is that I know and hopefully explain it in a way that maybe changes your perspectives about either what magic is or what it could mean for you or your life, or mostly just why we study it in the first place. So to I suppose get us back up to speed to where we sort of left off last time. It's I can't necessarily tell you why it happened, but as is not all that untypical for me, I ended up with strange technical problems, difficulties that ended up preventing me from sharing some information online the last time we did this talk. And I can't necessarily say why, but it's possible, definitely possible, that I shared something that was not mine to share. Either something that was shared to me as a secret. I'm pretty sure I didn't share any magical secrets that were not mine to share, but it is possible that I shared something that I purchased to understand, and don't want to take money out of the pocket of the person that I learned it from. So it may be in some strange servitor. Who can say? The point is, there was a lot that we talked about last time that didn't make my final videos. But we were also rushing towards the end, and regardless, so like I didn't exactly cover it the way I would have liked to in the first place. So now that we have this other opportunity, I feel like we should recap a little bit of my Magic 201 Spellwork, which was about like the things that you can actually do, or things that magicians actually practice, and all kinds of different ways to think about it, and the ways that I've categorized them, at least in my head, as a way to sort of like help you understand like what these operations are for and what they do. So like to start with, we were talking, actually I believe, originally we had put meditation in the middle, because that is sort of the fundamental tool from which everything else that you're going to be practicing is going to be based on, is your ability to meditate. But then we had the schools, magical schools, so to speak, of like divination, which we talked about being the way to gain non-local information of some type, and there are all types of ways that people gain this information, either astrology, tarot, or some very classic examples. But there are other things that we talked about, including mediums, spirit sessions, that sort of thing. The other school we did talk about, we talked about the double, and that was basically any work with your body of light, chakras, energy fields, astral projection, lucid dreaming, but also there are spells, rituals that we do in our magical practice, such as the middle pillar exercise, which is a ritual for calling the light down into your body of light to actually activate your chakras one at a time. Is another version of that. We then also talked about, or I was touching on it at least, the ever complicated transmogrification, which is, fancy word for the basic idea of transmogrification is the evolution of consciousness and the development of the true will. In the magical circle, we would actually we might even get a little more, drill down the idea of will a little more. The chaos tradition uses the word kia, which is actually just sort of the idea of the union of will and perception. You could also kind of think of that as like anybody who's played sports and has been in the zone, where you visualize what happens before it happens, and like it's like you knew it was going to happen before you threw the ball. It was just perfect. And blind up with your visualization. That's kia. That's like where will and perception have come together, and you are. It's more like you can almost think about it like you're the thing that's still, and the universe is moving around you. Or that's kind of what the magician is attempting to establish when they're establishing their magical circle. It's like I am the center, and all is moving around all is around my edge, so to speak, or whatever. But there's different ways you could think about transmogrification. You could think about it either evocations and invocations likewise may be contributing factors towards the that sort of evolution of consciousness. Knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel is a very classic one in the magical traditions. The idea of gaining a communication with your higher self, where you are receiving insights or actual conversations, depending on who the practitioner is. But other ways that you could, we could say you could be doing this, not necessarily, and that's the other thing that's worth pointing out, there's a lot of crossover between these two. None of these are just one and not the other. So like for instance, all the different yogic practices, while they may be technically transmogrification, you're also working on your body of light, especially if you're like practicing Kundalini yoga, for instance, which is all about, activating chakras and all that kind of stuff. So that's another way you think about it. Now we're catching up a little closer to where we almost cut off. I'm doing good. I thought I was going to ramble a lot more than this. The last two quote-unquote schools we were talking about were sorcery and enchantment. All right, so sorcery. So let's define these a little bit, and then we can talk about them a little more. So, what do these mean, and what do they mean to me? The idea of sorcery is the use of natural materials to effect magical change, which would basically be anything involving either harnessing the natural essence of the item in the first place, using fire to do firework or will work, that kind of thing. Like it's already, like in its essence, or water for another one. We were talking about that quite a bit. Of the idea that like these items can be charged, they hold a charge, they can hold your intention, and then the idea is that when that intention gets released, that basically creates the vacuum that nature abhors, that it then fills with manifestation. Is the idea. That's the sort of briefest, the broadest stroke. We can talk about this a little more when we talk about candle magic and stuff. But that was actually where we got cut off. I was trying to talk a little bit about antimatter. I'm no scientist, but the idea of antimatter being like, there are sort of two identical versions of the same, particle, so to speak, just one's positive and one is negative. If they were ever to meet, they would annihilate one another. But being separate, there are, this ties to elements of quantum entanglement and all that kind of stuff. But we could think about it from a magical standpoint, that we're here in Malkuth, in the kingdom, the 3D material world, but there is this astral realm that's above us, right? That we are. That's where the seat of our higher self, our unconscious, is the vehicle for communicating with that realm in the first place. And the idea is that, wow, am I getting ahead of myself? I feel like I am. Well, I'll get back to enchantment. But for now, we'll say that, see, now I'm screwing myself up. But the idea of, all right, let me finish what I was talking about, and I'll come back to this. I'm sorry. This is what I was afraid I was going to start doing. Okay, so enchantment, let's just talk about that real quick. Enchantment is the idea of exerting will to create desired effect. And we were talking about will a little bit before with, that being like the union of perception or what have you. But enchantment is more the idea of directing those energies. The idea, like, the basic way we could say this is where attention goes, energy flows. And we know, especially when we start practicing meditation, how difficult it is to hold something in our mind for extended periods of time. Minutes become exceedingly hard. That's what the magician practice is can you hold form and force in your mind? And so the way that I like to think about it is like, regardless of what we're doing, we always have attention. Just where is it focused? So you could almost think about it like either like a flashlight or even like a garden hose. It's always on. It's always spraying. It's always looking, it's always observing, it's always aware. It's just, if you are at the mercy of your thoughts, it's going to be all over the place and you're never going to focus on anything. Or worse, you end up focusing on the wrong stuff, the negative stuff. That's then what you end up bringing about in your life. You end up manifesting what you focus on. Where attention goes, energy flows. Another way I've heard this described is the idea of that which you give the most weight to is that which is the most likely to manifest. Right? So what you could think about is, since everything happens in the mind anyway, what we're doing is we're sort of shining our flashlight on the astral realm, if you think about it that way, where we're, charging these thought forms, right? These things that that one way or another are going to manifest, whatever we're focusing on. And so the longer that you can focus on it and then let it go when it's done, the more likely it is that will almost become heavy and drop, almost from the astral realm down into the manifest realm where we are. So that's sort of the idea of, and enchantment. There's all kinds of stuff related to this. From the thought form and egregore to like actual group work where you're coming together and collectively sort of shining your flashlights on the same thought form. It's going to be that much heavier, that much more likely to manifest, right? Especially when they overlap, right? When you are all in common purpose, right? That makes sense, right? Doesn't that make sense? Other forms of enchantment could be what we might even call gross magic, or psychokinesis, telekinesis, stuff like that, exerting true will on the 3D world. But also enchantment includes things like sigils, as well as actual spells and rituals that we can perform. It is all sort of harnessing the will. While sorcery, we could imagine like using the material stuff to sort of stack our magic, stack our correspondences, and we were talking about that. We were talking about the 5 Hermetic Principles, or the 7 Hermetic Principles. The idea of correspondence, that's important to understand, right? And that's what sorcery kind of gives us, right? That we're like, when we understand this, especially when we're understanding sort of the universal symbolism that we all sort of adapt, we can think about it that way. So I think that sort of brings us up to covering those topics. So we can get back to where I was rambling a little bit, right? Where I'm glad we talked about the flashlight thing a little bit, because that's kind of the way I tend to think about it, is like, just because your mind is wandering doesn't mean you can't bring it back to where it's supposed to be focused on in the first place. And that's the basis of meditation in the first place. It's about that returning, right? And that is also where we get those moments of gnosis, where we manage to get our instructions to our unconscious self, our higher self, to the astral realm, where it will then, depending on how much weight we were able to give it, it will bring about the heaviest version of what you're doing. Does that make sense? That's kind of how I think about it anyway. So, so getting back to, so I guess a couple other ways we can think about sorcery, ways that it is employed, is also in like where we have like magical weapons, for instance, that the dagger, the pentacle, the wand, where they represent those elements. That's a very good way of thinking about sorcery, because you're also charging it with those elements specifically, that kind of idea. Temple spaces in general, just having a temple space is a form of sorcery, right? Does that make sense? Even though what you're trying to do is get that space to resonate with your astral space, your astral temple, which is when we're doing our, Kabbalistic cross is what the beginning of pulling down the astral, or we were even talking about crunching the worlds together, so that they're all vibrating as one in the same frequency. Think about it that way. But also, all kinds of sacred objects, from holy water to, the different types of oils that, magicians will employ for, fast luck or road opening or dispelling negativity. There's all kinds of stuff in your local occult shop for acquiring interesting oils that you can use as sorcery in your other operations. It's always good to stack your magic, to stack your operations, to stack your correspondences, to stack this stuff, right? If you think about it, you're working on your light body so that you have more energy to enchant your object with, right? Like they're all connected. So these are just kind of ways to, in my mind anyway, to think about it. And I think that, okay, so, cool. I think that was the recap stuff that I didn't quite touch on. I know we talked about sigils and candle magic the last time we were here, and that may have been what got me in trouble in doing this, because there are some really great candle and sigil magic programs out there. Some are free, some are not. But we can, maybe if we do some Q&A, or maybe even the next time we do this, we can talk about that stuff a little more, of how to go about doing it, depending if you guys have questions or not. But regardless, I would say that, let me give you one last piece of advice. Regardless of how you think about it, regardless of which way you feel you're pulled, or chances are you're going to have a talent for one or more of these if you find yourself pursuing them. You might be one of those people who is just like with their meditation, like they glow all the time. They're just like high energy people, and we, like tend to gravitate towards that. You may just be naturally good at that, but not necessarily good at controlling or like focusing will. So regardless, there's always something to work on. Chances are you'd be working on all of these anyway, because you can always get better. And there's always different things to learn, and there are stuff that like I talk about, but I don't actually study myself. Other magicians will, or whatever. That's also why I recommend, whenever possible, finding like-minded folks who are studying the same stuff, but it may have different levels of expertise. I can come at stuff from like a sort of storyteller or artistic standpoint, but like when it comes to mathematics, I'm no business lecturing anybody on math, but I have a magician friend who's an astrophysicist, and so I can ask him my math questions. It's that kind of stuff, and then we come together and we both learn something from each other, and hopefully I'm doing a little bit of that today too. I don't know, we'll see.
Can you go over the 7 Hermetic Principles?
Sure. Okay, so let's review then what we talked about a couple of classes ago, 7 Hermetic Principles. These would be sort of, I like to think of them as universal laws, that they apply no matter who you are, or how you're, whatever spiritual practice, you will find these in them. The first was mentalism, and that was the idea that everything is mental. Everything begins in the mind, everything ends in the mind. In essence, the universe is God's imagination, and we're just in the manifest world, the heaviest part of it that's filtered down before everything returns to source once again, is the idea of mentalism. Okay, here we go. All right, so number 2 is polarity. And this makes a lot more sense when we were talking about the tree of life, of the idea that we are all caught between the poles of severity and mercy, that we are in a binary universe. The only singularity is the one, and since we're not the one, we are trapped between the poles of light and dark, good and evil, if you want to call it that way, but it's a light and dark dynamic. It's the male and female. It's the penetrator and the penetrated. It is light and dark, the ultimate dynamic, and that we, regardless, are caught some form or another in these poles, between these poles. We are caught between the extremes. We're trying to find our balance, whatever that balance is. Okay, the third Hermetic principle is vibration. The idea behind vibration is we could correlate vibration almost to our emotional states. We could think about it, or the way I like to think about it, I'm sure a lot of magicians share these ideas, is that our psyche, the human psyche, as above, so below. It's one of the, yeah, that's actually number 4, but everything is a reflection of the whole, as above, so below, as within, so without. So the idea of our psyche is a reflection of the psychic states of the universe. In essence, our emotions are sort of the harmonic notes of the universe. Like anger would be one tone, and compassion might be another. Or regardless, they resonate with. They have planetary states as well. When we talked about the alphabet of desire, we saw that starting to manifest. Where we could, like, for instance, correlate hate with Mars and love with Venus, and desire with Jupiter and fear with Mercury, that sort of thing. That's all. It's all vibration. Everything is vibration, and even matter is vibration. It's just a very slow form of vibration, and thoughts are vibration. They're just a very different form of vibration. And then the 4th Hermetic principle is correspondence. And that was sort of what we just talked about before, the magical axiom, as above, so below, as within, so without. Everything, the whole reflects the sum reflects the whole, and like attracts like. It's a reason why we are attracted to those who think like us. We're vibrating on a similar frequency, but we have that correspondence too. And correspondence is also, magicians will study because, it's important to understand how your will is like fire. And it's important to understand how your thoughts are like air. Like, that's the basis of correspondence. The fifth Hermetic principle, probably the most unpopular to talk about, is the idea of gender. And the idea of gender is that because, we talked about this before, because we're not the one, we are caught between the binary poles. So we all are male and female. We have those aspects in us. While I'm standing here and I'm a male, I have a Y chromosome, there's elements of me that are very female. I'm an artist. In that respect, I'm very much more about receiving information and redistributing it, and in a sort of a yin-yang sort of way, I'm very yin. I'm also very yang sometimes. I have a lot of Scorpio in me. But the idea of gender is, regardless, because we're not the one, we're a fractured, reflection of that. We're an incomplete element seeking its counterpart. And everything is doing that in one form or another. It's trying to, whether it's vibrating or it's finding its correspondence, it's trying to find its missing piece. And this manifests in all kinds of different ways. I think the one that we would recognize the most is when we find our soulmate. That is a missing piece that our soul may have been seeking all this time. But there's all different kinds of ways that might manifest, and it might not even be a person. There are all kinds of things we could find complete us, but it's very, very unlikely it's going to be a thing. It's probably more likely going to be an idea that you're missing. But that's the general idea of gender. That's what every operation is attempting to do, is to find the missing piece that I don't have to make what I want manifest happen, the next thing that happens. And we'll get to that when we get to the 7th here. But the 6th Hermetic principle is rhythm. The idea of rhythm is that everything in our three-dimensional cause and effect, arrow of time world, or consciousness, where we are only moving forward, at least as far as our conscious mind is concerned. Everything is in order, right? One, A, B, C, D, E. The idea of rhythm is that everything, all the vibrations of the universe, the way that things manifest, they unfold in their own time, in their own way, and you can't force them. Right? Like nothing you could do could make the universe, or well, more to the point, if you force it, you might end up damaging it. Right? Like, the idea of like, a butterfly in a cocoon. Right? You don't want it coming out early. That would be horrible. It needs to come out when it's ready. Right? In the same way, things are going to manifest when they're going to manifest. Now, that being said, we'll get to 8 when they manifest, but they're this is mostly going to be the work of the astral, the higher realms, spirits, your higher self, whoever it is. That's the phenomenology of manifestation. Rhythm is the rules that they got to play by too, right? In theory, they're playing by all of these, but that's the idea of rhythm, is that things unfold as they must, and they can't unfold any other way. Where are we on? 7, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, 7th Hermetic Principle. All right, all right. So these are the traditional ones, anyway. The 7th one is cause and effect, and this should make sense to all of us, right? Everything has a cause, right? You kick a ball and it moves. It's not going to move on its own. It needed to be kicked, right? Something caused that to move. Now, what caused something to move? We may or may not be aware of, but something did it, right? Everything, like we don't see. At least as far as I'm aware, we don't see spontaneous generation. Right? We don't see things just pop into existence for no good reason. We see manifestation happen in the what we would call synchronicity, meaningful coincidence, right? In the cause and effect kind of way of like, yeah, it will always seem like it was some kind of coincidence. It's just the chances of it sometimes seem astronomical, and that's where we get those moments of like, aha, see, it worked. But the idea of cause and effect is that the actions of manifestation need to use the resources that are here in the world, or at least what they have at their disposal in an astral sense as well. And we may not know what that entails, but generally speaking, everything is going to seem, like it could have just happened. In a coincidental kind of way, except the only difference is between coincidence and synchronicity is the magician knew that he had impetus in that result because of the operation that he did. And then that comes to the last, the unspoken Hermetic Principle.
Yeah, you were at 8.
I wrote this. Sorry, so there we go. Sorry. There we go. The 8th Hermetic Principle, so to speak, is silence. And the idea behind, there's a lot to think about in terms of silence, and this, in theory, I've heard it said, and I like this idea, that the magician worships at the altar of silence. And the idea that the one, the all, the creator, the divine spark, whatever, chaos, whatever you want to call it, is ultimately unknowable to us. And so what I will say in my prayer when I am giving worship to the Most High is that he who works in silence and not what silence can express. The idea is, I might actually cut that out. I don't know if that should make it. But all right, so the idea of silence also from a manifestation point of view is that once we're done our operation, once we're done shining the light in the astral realm, so to speak, charging what it is that we want to manifest, what we want to do is then we want to set it and forget it. We want to put that out of our mind so that our conscious mind is no longer engaged in the astral work. It is now time for our unconscious, subconscious, higher self, spirits, whatever the astral to do its work. And it can't work on it when we're working on it. Because where the conscious mind goes, the unconscious mind is pushed out of the way. That's sort of the original dynamic, right, of light and dark. Where the conscious mind goes, it will the unconscious cannot focus on that because that's what the conscious is doing. And so the idea is that we want to get our conscious mind out of the way. Either want to distract ourselves, keep ourselves busy, move on to another operation, whatever that might be, so that we're not standing around thinking about over and over and over what we want to manifest, especially when we get obsessed with it. That would be the worst thing. That's a surefire way to screw it up, right? Because obviously we can't let it go. And that's another indication of whether we are feeling in scarcity or whether we are feeling in abundance. The idea of whether we are holding on, whether we're feeling greedy, or whether we just can't seem to let something go is a pretty good indication that we are operating based on fear in one form or another, which is the basic element, of what makes you, whether you're in scarcity or whether you're in abundance. Whether you know you have enough already, and it doesn't matter whether you get more or not, because you have enough. That unconcerned magician, so to speak.